In the mounting tension between great powers, the Black Sea holds a particular strategic importance. It represents the waterway connecting Europe, Russia and the Middle East, and is believed to host substantial reserves of hydrocarbons. Its unique location makes it an important gateway for gas pipelines, fueling European markets, and is a key theatre in the confrontation between Russia and NATO. I'm Kasim, welcome to KJ Vids, and in this video we will look at the geopolitics of the Black Sea based on strategic reports by two analysts. The first report is by Alessandro Gagouridis on the Geopolitical Monitor website, and the second is an excellent essay by Boris Toucas from the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. You can find links to their original reports in the description. Controlling the Black Sea has been an objective of Russian foreign policy for centuries. As a vast continental power, Russia wanted to reach the southern warm seas to expand its influence. Under this logic, dominating the Black Sea was the first step to later reaching the Mediterranean. After centuries of struggles, the rising Russian Empire finally managed to establish its firm control over the Black Sea's northern coast after conquering the Khanate of Crimea in 1783. The Crimean city of Sevastopol was established the same year, and from then onwards, Russia emerged as a growing Black Sea power as the Ottoman Empire slipped onto a declining path. The bloody Crimean War in 1853 between the Ottoman Empire and Russia left hundreds of thousands dead. France and Britain sided with the Ottomans during this conflict, as they feared Russia's growing strength would result in Russia's hegemonic position in the region. Although this never materialized, a stronger but more isolated Russia repeatedly failed to seize control of the strategic Bosphorus and Dardanelles. One of Russia's primary motivations in entering World War I was to seize control of the Turkish Straits, which backfired when the Ottomans and Germans closed the straits, strangling the Russian economy. After the collapse of both the Russian and Ottoman empires in World War I, there was an unsuccessful attempt to redraw the map of the Black Sea region. The first attempt was the 1920 Treaty of Severus, and the second and more successful attempt was the 1923 Peace Treaty of Lausanne, which created the basis for the Republic of Turkey. Having acquired a more secure strategic position, Turkey was able to call upon the Lausanne Treaty to manage growing tensions amongst European powers in the region, which resulted in the 1936 Montreux Convention that established Turkish control over the straits and guaranteed free passage of warships belonging to Black Sea states that were not at war with Turkey. After the shocks of the 1917 revolution and of World War II, Russia, which was now the Soviet Union, took control of all the Balkan Peninsula by establishing communist regimes that in 1955 were tied in an alliance known as the Warsaw Pact. As such, the Black Sea turned into a largely Soviet-controlled zone during the Cold War. The only section that fell outside of Moscow's dominance was the southern coast, which included the NATO member Turkey. The Soviet Union pressed Turkey to renegotiate the Montreux Convention so that the Soviets could share control over the Bosphorus and Dardanelles with Turkey. Known as the 1946 Turkish Straits Crisis, the Soviet Union increased its Black Sea military presence and pressed the Turkish government to accept its demand for military bases on Turkish soil. In an attempt to shield itself from Soviet pressure, Turkey sought help from the United States, which responded by sending US warships to the region. Although the Soviet Union eventually backed down, the incident was one catalyst for the 1947 Truman Doctrine, which sought to contain a growing Soviet threat in the Mediterranean by anchoring both Turkey and Greece as members of NATO by 1952. Throughout the Cold War, there was an uneasy equilibrium in the Black Sea among Turkey, NATO, the United States and the Soviet Union. From 1976 on, Turkey allowed Soviet aircraft carriers built in Ukraine to pass through the straits. In strategic terms, this meant that access to the Mediterranean was difficult for Soviet forces, but at the same time it was equally challenging for NATO units to enter and operate in the Black Sea. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the Black Sea region was less geostrategically significant from a Western perspective, but it remained instrumental in shaping Russia's concept of its near abroad, which in the political language of Russia and some other post-Soviet states refers to the new independent republics which emerged after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The most important strategic issue following the end of the Cold War was the removal of nuclear weapons from Ukraine, which was encapsulated in the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, in which Ukraine agreed to the removal of its nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees by Russia, the United States and the United Kingdom, supported by France and China, so that it could protect its territorial integrity. Despite this policy success, an uneasy relationship continued between Ukraine and Russia over the strategic Crimean Peninsula. Although Russia maintained the perception that its former Soviet republics and the Black Sea area belonged to its natural sphere of influence, it lacked the political, economic and military power to fully impose its will. This began to change with a more assertive Russian regional policy in response to the so-called Colour Revolutions. The Colour Revolutions occurred in Russia's neighbourhood in Georgia, which was known as the Rose Revolution, and in Ukraine, which was known as the Orange Revolution, where leaders who were more susceptible to Russian influence and interests were replaced by pro-West and pro-Euro-Atlantic leaders. At the same time, NATO membership expanded to include Bulgaria and Romania in 2004, which resulted in 3 out of the Black Sea coast states being members of NATO, and 2 other states, Ukraine and Georgia, working in close partnership with the alliance with a potential view towards NATO membership. NATO viewed the Black Sea as important for Euro-Atlantic security. Russia viewed NATO's expansion as the West encroaching into its traditional sphere of influence and took measures to re-establish its influence and enhance its military presence in the Black Sea. Russian energy was used as an instrument of influence over Ukraine in 2006 and then again in 2009 when Russia temporarily seized the supply of natural gas to Europe through Ukraine and increased Russian energy prices. In August 2008, Russian military forces, which had retained forces in South Ossetia since the onset of the Georgia-South Ossetia conflict in 1993, defeated an attempt by the Georgian president to regain control over the breakaway region, then entered Georgia, overwhelming Georgian forces and nearly seized the capital Tbilisi. Defying a ceasefire agreement, Russia recognized the quote-unquote independence of both South Ossetia and Abkhazia shortly afterward and has since increased its control over Georgian territory and continues to integrate both regions administratively. After a popular protest in Ukraine ousted the pro-Russian President Yanukovych, Crimea once again took center stage in the old geopolitical conflict. Fearing the new government in Kyiv could decide to join the EU and NATO, in 2014, Russia annexed the strategic peninsula after a military coup and supported a separatist uprising in the eastern Donbas provinces. Since then, Ukraine has been divided by a conflict that has caused thousands of deaths and massive displacements. Former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, General Philip Breedlove, in 2015, characterized Crimea as a Russian platform for power projection. This entrenchment of Russia's forces in the peninsula was accompanied by an increasingly aggressive use of nuclear rhetoric, with the Kremlin hinting at possible future nuclear deployments in the peninsula and stating it retained the nuclear option to defend Crimea if necessary. Black Sea geopolitics are made even more complex by a third major actor in the Black Sea, Turkey. Due to a number of factors, US-Turkey relations are deteriorating to the point that Washington recently imposed sanctions on Ankara, thus contributing to a monetary crisis in the country. This high-profile falling is likely to have consequences on the region's geopolitics. The deterioration of Turkey's relations with its Western partners may give Russia the opportunity to further improve its position in the future. If Turkey were to take a more pro-Russian stance, then NATO's firm control would be limited to the western shores and Moscow would be able to operate in the Mediterranean with greater ease. As has been the case for decades, Ankara continues leveraging its strategic importance to both NATO and Russia by cooperating with both or by threatening to stop doing so to pursue its own interests. As the situation all around the Black Sea becomes more tense and militarized, the region is likely to become a potential hotspot in the coming years. As much as Ankara can pivot back and forth due to its usefulness for both Russia and America, it will ultimately have to make a choice. Its ambiguity and unpredictability make predictions difficult, but it seems that its relations with the US are deteriorating with every passing year. This can only benefit Russia, which will be able to pursue its economic interests, completing the Turk Stream and securing greater access to the Mediterranean. It is unlikely that Ankara will go to the point of rejecting NATO and moving definitely to Moscow's side, but it is enough for it to take a more cooperative stance towards Russia in order to cause problems for Washington and the EU. The Black Sea may host considerable oil reserves and is also a crossroad for pipelines. To diversify its energy export routes and avoid the risk of uncertain relations with Turkey, Russia proposed the South Stream project. Passing at the bottom of the Black Sea, it was meant to carry gas to Europe via Bulgaria and the former Yugoslavia, but the project was cancelled in 2014 in the wake of Crimea's annexation. Russia then resorted to two other projects, both passing via Turkey: the land-based Trans-Anatolian Pipeline, which was completed in June 2018, and Turk Stream, whose construction started in 2017 and that will cross the Black Sea before arriving at Turkish Thrace. A final plan, the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, is scheduled to connect with the Trans-Anatolian Pipeline and continue all the way to southern Italy via Greece, Albania and the Adriatic Sea. While operating in the Black Sea is easier today but still challenging for NATO forces than in the past, access to the Mediterranean remains difficult for Russia, since the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits are still controlled by NATO via Turkey. For its part, the prospect of closer cooperation between Russia and Turkey will push the US to look for other alternatives. It is already doing so somehow by building its security ties with Romania and Bulgaria, but this could also resonate in a country located outside of the Black Sea region, namely Greece. As Ankara becomes less reliable as a NATO partner, thus facilitating Moscow's access to the Mediterranean and consequently the Middle East, notably Syria, then Athens will become a more valuable partner from Washington's perspective. If the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits were no longer to be sufficient choke points, the Greek-controlled Aegean would acquire a greater strategic significance. However, the historical rivalry between Athens and Ankara, in addition to the tense situation in the eastern Mediterranean of late, mean that closer US-Greece ties will doubtlessly further alienate Turkey and drive it away from NATO and further towards Moscow's orbit. Turkey is therefore the power to monitor in the Black Sea region. If Ankara were to turn westward once again, then the geopolitics of the Black Sea will not see any other change apart from the increased military presence of both NATO and Russia. But if it were to intensify its partnership with Moscow, then the scenario may become even more tense and have consequences that stretch far beyond the Black Sea region. For Russia, the geostrategic factors of the Black Sea region have not changed since 1853, with NATO and the United States replacing individual European states as Russia's main geopolitical competitors. Crimea is the military source, Turkey is the pivot, and the Turkish Straits are the strategic throughput. And the end goal is access to and military presence in the eastern Mediterranean as a counterbalance to US and NATO expansion eastward and its presence in the Aegean and central Mediterranean. That's all for the video report by KJ Vids. I would like to thank Alessandro Gagiridis from the Geopolitical Monitor and Boris Toucas from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, whose organizations provided KJ Vids with permissions to use their research for this video. The links to their works are in the description. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for our latest videos and support our channel on fundmyvideo.com. Thanks for watching and see you next time.